Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afolake Oyinloye. Here's what's making headlines. Libya's oil production drops due to central bank crisis. Concerns are growing over prolonged instability in the country. China pledges $50 billion to Africa with focus on clean energy despite debt relief concerns. China, Africa's largest bilateral lender, is gradually transitioning its strategy. West African farmers struggle with post-harvest losses. Experts warn of severe impact on revenue and public well-being. Libya's oil industry is facing a sharp downturn as a power struggle over control of the central bank disrupts exports and cuts production. Let's dive deeper into the situation.
Libya, home to Africa's largest oil reserves, has been a key oil and gas exporter for decades. However, the recent removal of Central Bank Governor Sadiq Al-Kabir has disrupted oil production. Exports from major ports were halted amid a power struggle between political factions over control of the central bank and oil revenues. Since 90% of Libya's expenses, salaries and imports depend on oil revenue, controlling the central bank effectively means controlling the country's finances. The ongoing crisis could lead to a political and economic turmoil. The UN has held talks in Tripoli to resolve the central bank crisis, which has already led to an oil production blockade. If the situation persists, state salaries, banking operations and imports will be severely impacted, freezing Libya's economy and international trade. Due to oil field closures, production dropped from 959,000 barrels per day on August 26 to just over 591,000 barrels per day by August 28, resulting in losses exceeding $120 million. On September 3rd, Libya's legislative bodies agreed to jointly appoint a new central bank governor, offering hope for stability and a resolution to the oil revenue conflict.
Mohamed El Jara, managing partner at the Libya desk, joins us for more on that report. Welcome to the show. Now, how will the ousting of the central bank governor impact the future of the bank and the livelihoods of the ordinary Libyan people?
Libya exports pretty much everything. Libya sells oil and exports everything from medicines to food to clothing to whatever it is. And all of these imports have to have guarantees and letters of credits from the central bank and its vehicles. Right now, none of this is functional. Corresponding banks are rejecting the new authority that was appointed. And the question is, how long before Libyans will go short on medicine, food, and so on and so forth? And it's very likely that we will potentially start to see the signs of social unrest in the country. And we're starting to see signs of that as we speak, because there is now a fuel shortage issue. There is an electricity issue. So the impact is really real as far as the livelihoods of Libyans are concerned. And the impact is really real for the standing of the Central Bank of Libya as far as international institutions, financial institutions and systems are concerned. If this goes for longer, the damage will be irreparable.
Now, is it true that whoever controls the central bank controls the oil and Libya?
So there are two key institutions in Libya today. It's the National Oil Corporation, which is the technical institution in charge of exploring and producing and exporting and marketing Libya's oil resources and managing those resources. And then once the National Oil Corporation sells this oil, the revenues go to the central bank accounts. That is supposed to be the process. And yes, the central bank then has that power of liquidating, spending, and allocating that budget. But they do not control the oil. So the oil is under the control, or at least 85% of the oil facilities are located in areas that are controlled by the Libyan National Army based in Benghazi. And that creates this balance. So, and just to explain to the viewers and to the audience here, the central bank is supposed to be run, yes, by the executive, which is the central bank governor, but also there has to be a board of directors that decides policy. But Sadiq Kabir has been running the show alone, and this has been quite problematic. It has given him too much power, and also it has impacted the integrity of managing the monetary policy in Libya, the integrity of the institution itself, and it made it a valuable prize that everyone would want to control. This is why we have been led to this situation today.
How could this impact oil export to European countries?
So Europe or European countries are the biggest buyers of Libyan oil still. And obviously, with the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, Libya is one of the key places that the Europeans would want to look to. So today, Libya has lost almost 65% of its exports. But the problem is there was optimism that this crisis will be resolved very soon and that the United Nations will be quick to sign a deal. What I am getting is that international energy markets are now that have been kind of optimistic and they have accommodated the crisis in Libya, thinking that there will be a quick resolution. And they're starting to think that this is not going to happen. And it looks like this could be a protracted crisis that will lead to a prolonged shutdown of oil facilities. And any politically motivated shutdown of the oil usually lasts for longer periods of time.
Mr. Ejara, thank you so much for those insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
China's plans for 30 clean energy projects in Africa highlight a push for renewable energy. But concerns linger over the lack of concrete debt relief for struggling nations. More details in our report.
China pledged $50 billion in credit lines and investment for Africa over the next 3 years. This marks a decrease from previous years, reflecting China's changing approach due to domestic economic challenges and rising debt risks in African nations. One of the standout announcements from the summit was China's plan to launch 30 clean energy projects in Africa, underscoring a growing emphasis on renewable energy. Despite optimism around China's continued engagement with Africa, the lack of firm commitment on debt relief remains a concern for many African nations struggling with repayments.
The African debt problems did not appear because of Chinese cooperation. They are old problems that always existed in the African context. And of course, China, as a country that cooperates with Africa, will, I'm absolutely sure, have a very positive attitude in this regard.
Chinese creditors, like all of these other commercial creditors, want their debts to be repaid, and Chinese creditors also face additional financial challenges at home. They will also be constrained in the level of debt relief or concessions that they can give.
Private sector investments also play a pivotal role in Africa's development. Companies like DP World have invested extensively across the continent, committing billions of dollars to ports and logistic infrastructure. However, experts highlighted the challenges of doing business in certain African countries, with Djibouti being cited as an example where a disregard for international law and business norms has disrupted operations. This year, FOCAC Summit saw a reduced pledge from China, but reinforced its focus on sustainable investments, with debt management challenges remaining.
Food waste in West Africa is worsening, costing billions and affecting millions. In Nigeria and Ghana, 30 to 50% of food is lost due to storage and production inefficiencies. Tessem Akande reports.
Kachalam is among several farmers in Nigeria and other countries in West Africa who suffer post-harvest losses annually.
Some of the tomatoes spoiled midway from Mangu where I brought them, so I threw them away before arriving in Jos. It's really painful because schools are resuming, and I had hopes of paying my children's school fees with the proceeds from the sale.
The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, says about 50% of agricultural produce in the country, estimated around $2 billion, is lost after harvest. This food processing factory in Ghana, using raw material from smallholder farmers, is trying to solve the problem by pivoting to chocolate production from cocoa. The workers here say insufficient storage and processing facilities are part of the reasons behind the post-harvest losses in the region. But the company's efforts aren't enough to address the losses. Agriculture experts say the post-harvest losses also contribute to a hunger challenge in the region, with the United Nations estimating that nearly 55 million people are facing hunger in West and Central Africa. Industry experts want West African governments to collaborate to encourage investors and also train farmers in basic food preservation measures.
So even when we have foreigners that want to come into the continent and the region, for instance, West Africa, as we are talking about, they won't want to come to a terrain that is actually vulnerable.
Member states of West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, have formed a multinational joint task force to address security concerns, to encourage more farmers to cultivate and investors to set up more food processing factories in the region.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Business Africa. Thank you for joining us. For more in-depth business stories and latest news, stay tuned to Africanews and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.